You have carried this weight for so long that you've forgotten what lightness feels like. Tonight, as darkness wraps around your shoulders like an old coat, something shifts. The familiar ache in your chest whispers that there is more to this life than the roles you play, the masks you wear, the careful distance you keep from your own heart. The world has taught you to be small, to apologize for taking up space, to dim your light so others won't feel threatened by your radiance. But here, in this sacred hour between day and dream, the rules change. Here, you're allowed to be exactly who you are, wounds and all, beauty and all, truth and all. You've been walking through your days like a stranger in your own life, watching yourself from behind glass, wondering when you became so separate from joy. The child in you remembers what it felt like to be fully alive, to feel wonder at the sight of rain on windows, to believe in magic without apology. That child is still there, waiting in the shadows of your grown-up world. Tonight is different. Tonight you give yourself permission to remember what you've forgotten, to feel what you've buried, to see what you've been afraid to look at. This is not about becoming someone new. This is about coming home to who you've always been beneath the layers of protection and pretense. The journey begins not with answers, but with questions that have been knocking at the door of your consciousness for years. Who were you before the world told you who to be? What dreams did you abandon in the name of practicality? What parts of yourself did you exile because they didn't fit the story others needed you to tell? You've been living as if your sensitivity were a weakness, as if your depth were too much, as if your longing for something real and meaningful were naive. But what if these qualities are not flaws to be fixed, but gifts to be unwrapped? What if the very things that make you feel different are the keys to your wholeness? The night holds space for all of it. Your anger, your grief, your wild joy, your tender hopes. In darkness, there is no need to perform, no audience to please, no expectations to meet. There is only you and the vast mystery of your own becoming, unfolding like a flower that blooms in moonlight. You stand at the edge of a forest that exists nowhere and everywhere, a place that lives in the geography of the soul. The trees here are older than memory, their roots intertwined with stories you've never told, dreams you've never shared, truths you've never spoken aloud. This is the landscape of your inner world, wild and untamed, beautiful and frightening. The path before you is not marked by signs or certainties. It winds through terrain that shifts with your emotions, through clearings of clarity and thickets of confusion. But you have walked difficult paths before. You have survived storms that threatened to break you, carried burdens that would have crushed a lesser spirit, found strength in places you didn't know existed. Each step on this journey takes you deeper into territory that is both foreign and familiar. You recognize the scent of old fears hanging in the air like fog, the sound of childhood laughter echoing from some distant clearing, the feeling of being watched by parts of yourself you thought you had left behind. There is a cottage here, hidden among the trees with warm light spilling from its windows. This is where the lost parts of you have been waiting, tending a fire that has never gone out, keeping watch through all the years you thought you were alone. They have been here all along, your creativity, your intuition, your capacity for wonder, your ability to love without condition. You approach the door with trembling hands, knowing that once you cross this threshold, there is no pretending anymore. No more hiding behind the armor of cynicism, no more dismissing your dreams as foolish, no more treating your heart like an inconvenience. The door opens before you can knock, as if it has been expecting you. Inside, the cottage is both strange and familiar, filled with objects that tell the story of who you are beneath the surface. There are books you've always meant to read, songs you've hummed without knowing where you learned them, photographs of moments that exist only in the realm of possibility. This is the museum of your unlived life, the gallery of your hidden potential. A figure sits by the fire, their back turned to you. You cannot see their face, but you know them as intimately as you know your own breath. This is the part of you that has been waiting patiently for your return, the wise one who sees through the illusions you've built, who loves you exactly as you are while calling you to become who you're meant to be. They speak without turning around, their voice a whisper that reaches into the deepest places of your being. They tell you things you've always known but were afraid to believe, truths that challenge everything you've accepted about limitation and possibility. They remind you that you are not broken, that you have never been broken, that what you've called damage is simply the evidence of a life fully lived. The fire crackles between you, casting dancing shadows on the walls that seem to move with their own intelligence. In these shadows, you glimpse fragments of your history, moments of triumph you've forgotten, instances of courage you've minimized, times when you chose love over fear and changed the world in small but significant ways. You've been so focused on your mistakes, your failures, your shortcomings that you've lost sight of your victories. But they are all here, preserved in the amber of memory, waiting to remind you of your strength. That time you stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. That moment you chose honesty even when it would have been easier to lie. That decision to keep going when everything in you wanted to give up. The figure by the fire turns to face you, and you see that it is you, but not the you that looks back from mirrors, worn down by compromise and disappointment. This is you as you were meant to be, radiating the kind of confidence that comes not from perfection, but from self-acceptance, glowing with the light of someone who has made peace with their shadows. This other you speaks of things you've buried so deep, you thought they were gone forever. They speak of the time you decided you were too much, too sensitive, too intense for this world. They remind you of the day you first learned to apologize for your existence, to make yourself smaller so others could feel bigger, to dim your light so others wouldn't feel outshone. But they also speak of what lies beneath that learned smallness, a wild, creative force that has been waiting for permission to emerge. This force doesn't care about fitting in or meeting expectations. It cares about truth, about beauty, about the sacred act of becoming who you really are. It has been whispering to you through your dissatisfaction, calling to you through your longing, reaching for you through your dreams. You realize that every moment of feeling like you don't belong has been preparing you for this. The recognition that you don't belong to the small stories the world tells about who you should be. You belong to something larger, something wild and mysterious and infinitely more interesting than the scripts you've been handed. The other you stands and walks to a window that looks out onto a landscape you've never seen but somehow knows by heart. It is your inner world in all its complexity. Mountains of aspiration, valleys of sorrow, rivers of creativity, forests of memory. This is the territory you've been afraid to explore, thinking it too dangerous, too vast, too unpredictable. But as you look out onto this landscape, you feel not fear but recognition. This is home. Not the places you've lived or the roles you've played, but this wild inner country where your truest self resides. You've been homesick your entire life without knowing what you were longing for. You were longing for this, the courage to inhabit your own depths. The cottage begins to fade around you, but you are not afraid. You understand now that it was never a place but a state of being, a way of relating to yourself with kindness instead of criticism, with curiosity instead of judgment. You carry it with you as you step back onto the forest path, which now seems less mysterious and more like a homecoming. As you walk deeper into the woods, you encounter other travellers on similar journeys. Some are further along the path, their faces serene with hard-won wisdom. Others are just beginning, their eyes wide with the terror and excitement of self-discovery. You nod to each other in recognition, fellow travellers in the landscape of becoming. You begin to understand that this journey is both deeply personal and universally shared. Every human being carries within them this same wild inner country, this same longing for authenticity, this same collection of exiled parts waiting to be welcomed home. The paths may be different, but the destination is the same. Wholeness, integration, the courage to be fully yourself. The forest changes as you walk, sometimes opening into meadows of possibility, sometimes narrowing into passages that require you to move slowly, mindfully, with attention to each step. You learn to trust your inner compass, to follow the pull of your authentic desires, rather than the maps others have drawn for your life. In a clearing ahead, you see a circle of ancient stones, each one carved with symbols that speak to something deep in your cellular memory. This is a place of initiation, where the old self dies and the new self is born. Not through violence or force, but through the gentle surrender of illusions that no longer serve. You approach the centre of the circle and find a pool of water so still it serves as a perfect mirror. But when you look into it, you do not see your reflected face. Instead, you see layers. The child you were, the adolescent you became, the adult you've tried to be, and beneath all of these, something timeless and unchanging that has witnessed every moment of your becoming. This witnessing presence has been with you through every joy and sorrow, every triumph and defeat, every moment when you felt most alone. It has loved you without condition, seen your beauty even when you couldn't see it yourself, held space for your growth even when growth felt impossible. As you gaze into the pool, tears come, not tears of sadness but of recognition, of homecoming, of finally seeing yourself clearly. You're not the sum of your mistakes or the collection of your achievements. You're not the roles you play or the expectations you carry. You're something far more mysterious and magnificent, a unique expression of the creative force that moves through all of life. The stones around you begin to glow with a soft inner light, and you realize that this illumination is coming from within you. As you've released the need to be anything other than who you are, your own light has begun to shine more brightly. This is not the artificial brightness of performance or pretense, but the steady glow of authenticity. You think of all the times you've been told to be realistic, to lower your expectations, to accept less than what your heart desires. You think of all the dreams you've postponed, the chances you haven't taken, the words you haven't spoken because you were afraid of being too much or not enough. But here, in this sacred space between who you've been and who you're becoming, you understand that those voices were never telling you the truth about your limitations. They were simply reflecting their own fears, their own unhealed wounds, their own unexamined beliefs about what's possible. Your dreams are not too big. Your sensitivity is not too much. Your desire for deep connection, meaningful work, and authentic expression is not naive. These longings are the compass points of your soul, guiding you toward a life that honors who you really are. The pool shows you glimpses of what becomes possible when you stop fighting yourself and start flowing with your natural rhythms. You see yourself creating with abandon, loving without reservation, speaking your truth without apology. You see yourself standing in your power not through domination, but through presence, making a difference not through perfection, but through authenticity. A great thinker once observed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But what you're discovering here is that consciousness is not something you achieve once and then possess forever. It's a practice, a daily choice to turn toward yourself with compassion, to listen to the whispers of your inner wisdom, to honor the complexity of your human experience. This same wise man spoke of the shadow, not as something evil to be conquered, but as the parts of ourselves we've relegated to darkness because they didn't fit the image we wanted to project. Your shadow contains not just your flaws and fears, but also your unlived potential, your disowned gifts, your unexpressed creativity. What if your anger is not something to be ashamed of, but energy that wants to protect what you love? What if your sadness is not weakness, but depth, not pathology, but appropriate response to a world that often values surfaces over substance? What if your intensity is not too much, but exactly what's needed to create the kind of change that matters? The pool reflects back to you all the parts of yourself you've tried to hide or fix or improve, but in this sacred space, you see them differently. Your perfectionism reveals itself as a deep care for excellence. Your tendency to withdraw shows itself as a need for solitude that allows your creativity to flourish. Your overthinking transforms into the gift of seeing connections others miss. As you stand among the glowing stones, you feel something shifting in your chest, a loosening, an opening, a return to breath you didn't realize you'd been holding. The weight you've carried for so long begins to lift, not because your circumstances have changed, but because your relationship to them has transformed. You're no longer fighting a war against yourself. You're no longer trying to be someone else's version of acceptable. You're no longer carrying the burden of being perfect, of having all the answers, of never making mistakes. Instead, you're embracing the magnificent messiness of being human, the beautiful complexity of a life lived with an open heart. The stones pulse with warmth, and you understand that this is your initiation into a different way of being. Not the initiation of achievement or accomplishment, but the initiation of self-acceptance. You have looked into the depths of who you are and chosen love over judgment, curiosity over criticism, compassion over condemnation. This doesn't mean you're finished growing or learning or becoming. It means you're doing so from a foundation of self-acceptance rather than self-rejection. You're no longer trying to escape yourself, but rather to express yourself more fully, more authentically, more courageously. The path ahead comes into focus now, winding through landscapes you've never seen but somehow recognize. This is the path of your authentic life. The road that leads not away from who you are, but deeper into the mystery of your becoming. It's not always an easy path, but it's yours. You take one last look at the pool, and this time you see not just yourself, but all the versions of yourself that exist in potential. The artist, the healer, the teacher, the lover, the mystic, the revolutionary. They are all there, waiting not to replace who you are, but to add their colours to the palette of your existence. As you step out of the stone circle, you carry with you not answers, but something far more valuable, the ability to ask better questions. Instead of, "What's wrong with me?" you learn to ask, "What wants to emerge through me?" Instead of, "How can I fix myself?" you discover, "How can I honour what I am?" The forest path continues, but you walk it now with different eyes. The trees are no longer obstacles, but teachers, their roots showing you about foundation, their branches demonstrating how to reach toward light while staying grounded. The shadows are no longer something to fear, but places of rest and reflection, necessary for growth. You begin to understand that the journey toward wholeness is not a destination you arrive at, but a way of travelling. It's in the choosing, moment by moment, to turn toward yourself with kindness. It's in the decision to listen to your inner voice, even when it contradicts the outer voices that claim to know what's best for you. The path leads you to a river that runs clear and deep, its surface reflecting not just your image, but the vast sky above. This is the river of your life force, the current that has been carrying you even when you thought you were lost. Especially when you thought you were lost. It has never stopped flowing, even when you built dams of shoulds and musts, even when you tried to redirect it into channels that weren't meant for its waters. You kneel beside the river and cup the water in your hands. It tastes like memory and possibility, like tears and laughter, like everything you've been and everything you might become. As you drink, you feel yourself being nourished not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, creatively. This is what it means to come back to yourself, to remember that you are not separate from the life force that moves through all things, that your struggles and your joys are part of a larger pattern of becoming that includes every living being. You're not alone in your journey toward authenticity. You're part of an ancient procession of souls learning to embark upon the sacred task of becoming who they really are. The river speaks to you in the language of flow, teaching you about surrender and trust, about finding your way not through force, but through alignment with your natural current. It shows you how to move around obstacles rather than through them, how to find the path of least resistance that is also the path of greatest authenticity. On the far shore, you see a garden unlike any you've ever imagined. It grows not in neat rows, but in wild abundance, each plant honouring its own nature while contributing to the beauty of the whole. This is what your life looks like when you stop trying to force yourself into patterns that don't fit and start allowing your authentic nature to unfold. You cross the river not by swimming against the current, but by allowing it to carry you to where you need to go. The water is surprisingly warm, supportive, as if it recognizes you as someone who has finally remembered how to trust the flow of their own life. The garden welcomes you with the fragrance of possibility. Here grow the flowers of your unexpressed creativity, the fruits of your unlived dreams, the herbs of your natural healing gifts. Nothing here has been cultivated through force or manipulation. Everything has grown from the rich soil of self-acceptance, watered by the rains of compassion, warmed by the sun of authentic love. You walk among the plants, touching leaves that represent different aspects of your potential. Some are familiar, gifts you've always known you carried, but perhaps haven't fully developed. Others surprise you, talents and capacities you never knew existed, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. In the centre of the garden stands a tree unlike any other, its trunk silver with age and wisdom, its branches reaching toward every direction of the compass. This is the tree of your integrated self, grown strong through the marriage of your light and shadow, your earthbound humanity and your skyward aspirations. Under the tree you find a bench worn smooth by countless other travellers who have sat here in contemplation. As you settle onto its surface, you feel connected not just to your own journey, but to the journeys of all who have walked the path toward wholeness before you. Their wisdom flows up through the wood, their courage strengthens your resolve, their compassion softens any remaining resistance to your own becoming. The great psychologist who spent his life mapping the territory of the human soul once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Sitting here beneath this ancient tree, you understand what he meant. It's not a privilege in the sense of special advantage, but in the sense of sacred opportunity. The chance to live as an authentic expression of the mystery that created you. Your life up until now has not been a mistake, even when it felt like one. Every detour has taught you something about where you don't want to go. Every mistake has shown you something about who you don't want to be. Every painful experience has cracked you open a little more, letting in the light that illuminates your true path. You think of the people who told you to be more realistic, and you feel compassion for their fears. You think of the voices that said you were too much or not enough, and you understand they were speaking from their own wounds. You think of all the times you believed those voices, and you forgive yourself for not knowing then what you know now. This forgiveness is not a one-time event, but an ongoing practice, a daily choice to extend to yourself the same mercy you would offer a beloved friend. It's the recognition that you have always been doing the best you could with the awareness you had at the time, and that even your unconscious choices were serving your survival and growth in ways you're only now beginning to understand. The tree's branches rustle overhead, and in their movement you hear the whisper of wind carrying messages from your future self, the one who has learned to live with authenticity as a baseline rather than an aspiration. This future self doesn't have fewer challenges or fewer moments of doubt, but they meet these experiences from a place of groundedness, knowing that they are whole regardless of circumstances. Your future self whispers that the journey doesn't end here, in this garden of integration. It continues into the world, where you get to practice being who you really are in relationships, in work, in the 1,000 small decisions that make up a life. The garden is not a destination, but a home base, a place you can return to whenever you need to remember who you are beneath the roles and expectations. As twilight deepens around you, the garden begins to glow with its own inner light. Each plant, each flower, each tree emanates the soft radiance of authentic being. You realize that this light exists within you too, has always existed within you, waiting for the moment when you would stop looking for it outside yourself and recognize it as your birthright. This is what the ancient wisdom traditions meant when they spoke of enlightenment. Not some superhuman state of perfection, but the simple recognition of your own inherent wholeness, the dropping away of the illusion that you are broken or lacking or fundamentally flawed. You are not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The silver tree begins to sing, not with voice, but with presence, a vibration that resonates in every cell of your being. It's the song of integration, the harmony that emerges when all parts of yourself are welcomed home. Your inner child dances to this music, finally free to play and wonder and create without apology. Your wise elder nods in recognition, having waited patiently for this moment of homecoming. You stand and place your hands on the tree's bark, feeling the life force that flows between its roots and branches, earth and sky, shadow and light. This same life force flows through you, has always flowed through you, will continue to flow through you as you walk back into the world. Transformed not by what you've gained, but by what you've remembered. The great depth psychologist spoke of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, integrating the conscious and unconscious aspects of your personality into a unified whole. What you've experienced here is both a glimpse of that integration and an invitation to make it real through how you choose to live each day. You're not the same person who entered this forest of the soul. You carry within you now a different relationship to your own experience, a deeper trust in your inner wisdom, a greater capacity to stay present with whatever arises without losing yourself in it. You have remembered that you are both human and divine, limited and limitless, individual and universal. The path back through the forest appears before you, but it's not the same path you walked to get here. This one glows with your own inner light, marked by your unique footprints, scented with the flowers that bloom only in the garden of your authentic self. You will never be lost in the same way again, because you now know the way home to yourself. As you walk, you notice that the forest around you is waking up, not to a new day, but to the eternal present moment in which all healing happens, all growth occurs, all transformation becomes possible. The trees lean in to witness your passage, the flowers open to celebrate your becoming, the very air shimmers with the recognition that another soul has remembered who they really are. You emerge from the forest not into the same world you left, but into a world made new by your transformation. The external circumstances may look identical, but you see them through different eyes that recognize the sacred in the ordinary, the meaningful in the mundane, the possible in what others call impossible. The cottage of your integration travels with you now, no longer a place you visit, but a way of being you embody. You carry within yourself the warm light of self-acceptance, the comfortable chairs of compassion, the nourishing fire of authentic love. You are home, finally and forever, not because you've arrived somewhere, but because you've remembered you never left. In the days that follow, people notice something different about you, though they may not be able to name what it is. You move through the world with a quality of presence that wasn't there before, a groundedness that comes from knowing who you are regardless of external validation or criticism. You listen more deeply, speak more truthfully, love more freely. The work you do in the world begins to change, not necessarily in its form, but in its essence. Whether you're teaching children, building bridges, writing stories, or healing bodies, you do it now from the fullness of who you are rather than from the emptiness of who you think you should be. Your authentic presence becomes a gift to everyone whose life touches yours. Relationships shift as you stop performing and start being. Some people, comfortable with the old version of you, may feel uncomfortable with your newfound authenticity. Others, drawn to genuine connection, will find their way into your life as if magnetized by your truth. You learn to trust this natural selection process, understanding that not everyone is meant to walk with you on every part of your journey. The creative force that was awakened in the garden begins to express itself in unexpected ways. You might find yourself drawn to art forms you never considered, conversations you never dared to have, risks you never thought you could take. This creativity is not about producing something the world will applaud, but about allowing the unique gift of your being to flow into form. You discover that the inner child who was healed in your night journey has much to teach the adult you've become. Their sense of wonder transforms routine into adventure. Their capacity for joy finds celebration in small moments. Their natural trust in the goodness of life helps you navigate uncertainty with grace rather than anxiety. The wise elder within you also becomes more accessible, offering guidance not through shoulds and musts, but through gentle invitations to remember what you know in your bones to be true. This inner wisdom doesn't speak in the language of dogma or doctrine, but in the poetry of lived experience, the metaphors of personal meaning, the symbols that speak directly to your soul. Most importantly, you learn to trust the process of your own becoming. You understand now that there is no final destination, no moment when you'll be completely finished growing and changing and discovering new aspects of yourself. The journey toward wholeness is the journey itself, not something that ends when you arrive at a particular state of consciousness or achievement. The dreams that visit you now are different too. Where once they might have been filled with anxiety or confusion, they now serve as continued invitations to explore the depths of your being. You begin to see them not as random neural firings, but as communications from the wise unconscious, offering guidance, healing, and creative inspiration. You practice what the depth psychologist called active imagination, engaging consciously with the images and symbols that arise from your unconscious mind, treating them not as meaningless fantasy, but as meaningful communication from parts of yourself that don't speak in the language of logic and reason. Months pass, and you realize that the transformation you experience wasn't a one-time event, but the beginning of a new way of relating to yourself and your life. The cottage in the forest, the garden of integration, the silver tree of wholeness. These are not just beautiful memories, but living realities that you can access whenever you turn inward with the same quality of attention and acceptance. You develop practices that help you stay connected to this inner landscape. Perhaps it's a morning ritual of sitting quietly and listening to what wants to emerge in you that day. Maybe it's an evening practice of reviewing the day not with judgment, but with curiosity, asking what you learned about yourself, what you celebrated, what you want to do differently tomorrow. Some days the path is clear and the walking is easy. You feel aligned with your purpose, connected to your inner wisdom, flowing with the current of your authentic life. Other days bring fog and uncertainty, moments when you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and your direction. But now you understand that both clear days and foggy ones are part of the journey. The fog you've learned is not an obstacle to be eliminated, but a natural part of the landscape of becoming. It slows you down, yes, but it also invites you to rely on senses other than sight, to feel your way forward with intuition, to listen more carefully to the subtle guidance of your inner compass, to trust the path even when you can't see where it leads. You remember the words of the great explorer of the psyche. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. This looking inside is not a selfish turning away from the world, but a turning toward the source of your most authentic gifts to the world. The shadow work that began in your night journey continues in gentler but no less profound ways. You catch yourself in moments of self-judgment and ask, what is this criticism trying to protect in me? You notice when you're projecting your disowned qualities onto others and use it as an opportunity to reclaim those aspects of yourself. You learn to see your mistakes not as evidence of fundamental flaws, but as information about where you're still growing, still learning, still becoming more of who you're meant to be. This shift in perspective transforms failure from something to be feared into something to be curious about, mined for the wisdom it contains. The relationships in your life become laboratories for practicing authenticity. You learn to say no without guilt, yes without resentment, and I don't know without shame. You discover that vulnerability is not weakness, but the courage to be seen as you are, and that this courage creates the foundation for genuine intimacy. In your work, whatever it may be, you begin to look for ways to bring more of your authentic self into what you do. This doesn't mean ignoring professional boundaries or abandoning practical concerns, but it does mean asking how you can honor your values, use your natural gifts, and contribute to something meaningful through your daily labor. Years flow by like the river you crossed in your inner journey, and you marvel at how different your life looks now. Not necessarily in its external structure, but in its internal landscape. You've learned to trust the timing of your own development, to honor the seasons of expansion and contraction, growth and rest, clarity and confusion that make up the natural rhythm of a conscious life. The child within you has found safe expression in adult life. Maybe you've rediscovered play, learned to dance badly and joyfully, given yourself permission to be silly, to wonder aloud, to approach life with beginner's mind. Or perhaps the child's healing has been quieter. The simple absence of that constant inner critic, the presence of self-compassion where self-judgment used to live. Your relationship with your body has likely shifted too. Where once you might have seen it as an enemy to be conquered, or an object to be perfected, you now relate to it as a faithful companion on the journey of being human. You listen to its needs, honor its rhythms, appreciate its capacity for pleasure, comfort, and sensation. The creative projects that emerge from your authentic self have taken root in the world in ways both large and small. Perhaps you've written the book, started the business, changed careers, moved to a new place, ended the relationship that was draining your life force, began the one that nourishes your soul. Or maybe the changes have been more subtle, the way you listen to friends, the presence you bring to conversations, the quality of attention you offer to whatever you're doing. You've learned that authenticity is not a fixed state, but a dynamic process, not a destination, but a way of traveling. Some days you feel fully aligned with who you are, clear about your values and desires, confident in your choices. Other days you feel like you're just figuring it out as you go along, making it up as you move forward. Both experiences are part of the authentic life. The spiritual dimension of your existence has likely deepened as well, though not necessarily in ways you expected. You might have discovered that the sacred is not separate from the ordinary, but woven through it like golden thread through fabric. Your morning coffee becomes a ritual of gratitude, your evening walk a form of moving meditation, your work a practice of service. Or perhaps your spirituality has become more personal, less dependent on external authority, and more rooted in your direct experience of mystery and meaning. You've learned to trust your own sense of what's sacred, what's meaningful, what connects you to something larger than your individual concerns. The famous depth psychologist wrote extensively about the second half of life, suggesting that if the first half is about establishing ourselves in the world, the second half is about discovering what the world is asking of us. Regardless of your chronological age, the night journey you took through the forest of your soul has initiated you into this second half of life consciousness. You find yourself less concerned with impressing others and more interested in expressing yourself, less worried about fitting in, and more committed to standing for what matters to you. less driven by external rewards and more motivated by internal satisfaction, the deep contentment that comes from living in alignment with your authentic nature. The garden of your integrated self continues to bloom and evolve, tended by the daily choices you make to honor who you are. Some seasons it flourishes with obvious abundance, creative projects flowering, relationships bearing fruit, work providing nourishment for both yourself and others. Other seasons require more faith as you tend the soil, trust the dormant seeds, water the ground even when nothing seems to be growing. You've learned that this tending is not a burden but a joy, not something you have to do but something you get to do. The privilege of consciousness, the opportunity to participate in your own becoming, the chance to contribute your unique note to the great symphony of existence, these feel less like obligations and more like invitations to dance with the mystery of being alive. The shadow aspects of your personality have not disappeared. They've been integrated. Your anger has become fierce compassion for injustice. Your sadness has deepened into empathy for the suffering of others. Your fear has transformed into healthy caution and appropriate boundaries. Your selfishness has evolved into proper self-care that allows you to give from abundance rather than depletion. You understand now what it means to love yourself not as narcissistic self-absorption, but as the foundation for loving others authentically. You cannot give what you do not have, cannot offer to others the acceptance you refuse to give yourself, cannot create healing in the world from a place of inner woundedness. This self-love is not the shallow, positive thinking that denies difficulty, but the deep self-compassion that can hold all of your human experience with tenderness. It includes love for your mistakes, your limitations, your continuing areas of growth. It's love that sees clearly and chooses affection anyway, love that doesn't require perfection as a prerequisite. The influence of your transformation ripples out in ways both obvious and invisible. The children in your life sense your greater presence and feel safer to be themselves. The friends in your circle find permission in your authenticity to explore their own. Strangers you encounter feel something different about you, a quality of genuineness that's become increasingly rare in a world of performance and pretense. You've become what one might call a permission giver, not through preaching or teaching, but through being. Your life has become a demonstration that it's possible to be authentic and successful, vulnerable and strong, spiritual and practical, individual and connected. You've proven, first to yourself and then to others, that wholeness is not just a beautiful idea but a lived reality. The work of individuation, as the great psychologist described it, is never complete. Each day brings new opportunities to choose authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, growth over stagnation. But now these choices feel less like struggle and more like homecoming, less like sacrifice and more like gift. You've learned to recognize the voice of your authentic self among all the other voices that compete for your attention. It's usually quieter than the voices of should and must, gentler than the voices of fear and doubt, but it carries a quality of truth that the others lack. When you follow this voice, even when it leads you into uncertainty, you feel the deep satisfaction of alignment. The relationships that remain in your life have been seasoned by your transformation. Those built on mutual performance have naturally fallen away, while those rooted in genuine care have deepened. You've learned the difference between being needed and being loved, between being useful and being valued for who you are. In your intimate partnerships, whether romantic, familial, or friendship, you bring a different quality of presence now. You're less reactive, more responsive, less defensive, more curious, less interested in being right and more committed to being real. This shift has created space for deeper intimacy, the kind that can only exist between people who are willing to be known. Your relationship with conflict has transformed as well. Where once you might have avoided it at all costs or engaged it as warfare, you now see it as information about misalignment, an invitation to greater understanding, an opportunity for growth. You've learned to disagree without withdrawing love, to stand firm without becoming rigid, to bend without breaking. The creative projects that flow from your authentic center have a different quality than anything you've produced before. There's less ego in them, less need for external validation, and paradoxically, they tend to resonate more deeply with others. When you create from your wholeness rather than your wounds, from your fullness rather than your emptiness, the work carries a healing vibration. You might find yourself drawn to help others on their own journeys toward authenticity. Not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who has learned to trust the process. You offer not advice, but presence, not solutions, but solidarity. You understand that each person's path is unique, even as the destination, wholeness, is universal. The seasons of your inner life have taught you patience with the cycles of expansion and contraction, clarity and confusion, confidence and doubt that characterize any authentic human existence. You no longer expect to feel inspired every day, motivated every moment, clear about every decision. You've learned to work with your natural rhythms rather than against them. During periods of expansion, you embrace new challenges, explore uncharted territories of yourself, take risks that your former self would have found terrifying. During times of contraction, you go inward, rest, reflect, integrate what you've learned. You've discovered that both phases are necessary, both sacred. Your relationship with uncertainty has perhaps undergone the most profound transformation. Where once the unknown felt threatening, a sign that you weren't prepared enough, smart enough, good enough, it now feels exciting, pregnant with possibility. You've learned to surf the waves of change rather than fight them, to dance with ambiguity rather than demand premature clarity. This comfort with uncertainty has freed you to take the kinds of risks that matter, not reckless gambles but conscious choices to bet on your authentic self rather than on security, to invest in meaning rather than just money, to choose love even when its outcome is uncertain. These risks feel less dangerous now because you know you can trust yourself to handle whatever comes. The dreams that visit your sleep continue to serve as guidance from the unconscious realm. You've learned their symbolic language, understand their metaphorical logic, appreciate their capacity to show you truths that your rational mind might miss. Sometimes they offer healing, sometimes warning, sometimes pure creative inspiration. Always they remind you that you are more than your conscious awareness, connected to sources of wisdom deeper than thought. You practice what the great analyst called amplification, taking the images from dreams and exploring their personal and universal meanings, allowing them to speak to you about your current life situation, your ongoing development, your unlived potentials. This practice has become another way of staying in conversation with your unconscious wisdom. The shadow work that began in your forest journey continues in gentler, but no less important ways. You've learned to catch yourself in moments of projection, those times when you see in others the qualities you haven't yet accepted in yourself. Instead of judgment, these moments now bring curiosity. What is this person mirroring back to me about myself? You've also learned to recognize when you're in the grip of a complex, those autonomous patterns that can temporarily take over consciousness, making you react in ways that don't feel like your true self. Rather than being ashamed of these moments, you use them as information about where healing is still needed, where integration is still in process. The professional life you've built reflects your values more clearly now. Whether you've made dramatic external changes or subtle internal shifts, your work feels more like an expression of who you are rather than something you do to survive. You bring your gifts to the world not because you have to, but because you want to, because it feels like the natural overflow of a life lived authentically. You've learned to set boundaries that protect your energy without closing your heart, to say no to requests that don't align with your values without judgment of those making them. You understand now that boundaries are not walls but membranes. They allow what's nourishing to pass through while filtering out what's toxic. The money and success that flow from this authentic engagement with work often surprise you with their abundance. When you stop trying to be what others want and start being who you are, you discover that there are people looking for exactly what you have to offer. The marketplace, it turns out, has room for authenticity. Your relationship with material possessions has likely simplified. You find yourself drawn to things that serve beauty or function rather than status, objects that hold meaning rather than just monetary value. You've learnt the difference between having enough and having too much, between prosperity and excess. The spiritual practices that sustain you might be traditional or completely personal, formal or informal, solitary or communal. What matters is not their form, but their function. Do they help you stay connected to your authentic self? Do they provide refuge when life becomes overwhelming? Do they remind you of your connection to something larger than your individual concerns? You might find yourself drawn to spend time in nature, not as escape from humanity, but as a reminder of your place in the larger web of existence. The trees teach you about growth, the rivers about flow, the mountains about endurance, the sky about vastness. You remember that you're not separate from nature but an expression of it. Or perhaps your spiritual life centers around service, the recognition that individual wholeness is not the end goal but the beginning, the foundation from which you can contribute to the healing of the world. You understand now that personal transformation and social transformation are not separate endeavors but different aspects of the same sacred work. The great depth psychologist spoke often of the transcendent function, the capacity of the psyche to create new attitudes and possibilities through the marriage of conscious and unconscious contents. You've experienced this function many times now, watched it create solutions to problems your rational mind couldn't solve, open doors your logical thinking couldn't unlock. You've learned to trust this transcendent function, to create space for it to operate through practices like meditation, journaling, walking, or simply sitting quietly with whatever challenge you're facing. You know now that the best decisions often arise not from forcing but from allowing, not from pushing but from patience. The relationships in your life have become laboratories for practicing unconditional love, not the enabling kind that avoids truth, but the kind that sees clearly and loves anyway. You've learned to love people for who they are rather than who they might become, to appreciate them in this moment rather than waiting for them to meet your expectations. This doesn't mean you accept behavior that's harmful or stay in situations that drain your life force. Rather, you've learned to make decisions about relationship boundaries from love rather than fear, from clarity rather than confusion, from your authentic self rather than your wounded self. You've discovered that when you love yourself fully, you naturally attract others who are capable of loving you well. The desperate need for validation that might have driven earlier relationships has been replaced by genuine desire for connection. You seek companions rather than saviors, partners rather than projects. The children in your life, whether your own or others, benefit enormously from your transformation. They sense your greater presence, your authentic emotions, your capacity to see and appreciate them for who they are rather than who you think they should become. You model for them what it looks like to be a whole human being, dealing with challenges from a place of groundedness rather than reactivity. If you're a parent, you've likely discovered that children learn more from who you are than from what you say. Your own journey toward authenticity gives them permission to be themselves, to feel their feelings, to trust their inner wisdom even when it contradicts external expectations. The aging process, whether you're experiencing it now or anticipating it, no longer feels like decline but like deepening. You understand that while the body may become less capable, the spirit often becomes more free. The opinions of others matter less, the pressure to achieve decreases, and the simple joy of being alive becomes more apparent. You've learned to appreciate the wisdom that comes only through lived experience, the kind of knowing that can't be taught, but must be earned through facing life's challenges with courage and consciousness. Your mistakes have become teachers, your failures have become compost for new growth, your sufferings have become sources of compassion. The legacy you're creating is not measured in external achievements, but in the healing you've done, the authenticity you've modeled, the love you've shared. You understand now that every person who learns to love themselves fully contributes to the healing of the collective human family. Carl Jung observed that the individual is the only reality, that the collective is simply the sum of individuals. Your personal work toward wholeness is therefore not selfish but service, not narcissistic but necessary. The world needs people who have done their inner work, who can respond rather than react, who can love from fullness rather than need. The cycles of the natural world mirror the cycles of your inner development. Spring brings new beginnings, fresh creative impulses, the energy to start projects that have been gestating through winter's contemplation. Summer offers the warmth to nurture growth, the long days to develop what was begun, the abundance to share with others. Autumn teaches the wisdom of letting go, of releasing what no longer serves, of harvesting the wisdom from experiences before they pass into memory. Winter provides the darkness necessary for deep rest, inner reflection, the germination of seeds that will sprout when the time is right. You've learned to honor these cycles in your own life rather than fighting them, to recognize when you're in a planting season versus a harvesting time, when you need the bright energy of activity versus the quiet wisdom of reflection. This alignment with natural rhythms has brought a quality of ease to your life that was absent when you tried to force growth according to artificial schedules. The dreams of your youth, whether realized or transformed, have found their proper place in the larger narrative of your becoming. Perhaps you became the artist you always wanted to be, Or perhaps you discovered that the creativity you thought belonged only in art actually expresses itself through everything you do with love and attention. Maybe you didn't become famous, but you became authentic, which turns out to be far more satisfying. Maybe you didn't accumulate the wealth you once thought you needed, but you discovered the abundance that comes from appreciating what you have, from finding richness in simple pleasures, from knowing that you are enough exactly as you are. The fears that once seemed so real and threatening have been revealed as largely phantoms, projections of a mind conditioned to expect catastrophe rather than blessing, to prepare for scarcity rather than abundance, to protect against imagined threats rather than open to actual possibilities. This doesn't mean you've become naive about real dangers or genuine challenges. Rather, you've learned to distinguish between useful caution and paralyzing anxiety, between reasonable preparation and obsessive worry, between protective boundaries and defensive walls. Your nervous system has learned to relax into a baseline of safety rather than hypervigilance. Your body remembers what it feels like to be at ease, to breathe deeply, to move with grace rather than tension. This physical relaxation supports emotional resilience and mental clarity in ways you might never have expected. The practices that maintain your well-being have become as natural as breathing. Whether it's morning meditation, evening reflection, weekly time in nature, or monthly creative expression, these activities no longer feel like should-dos on a self-improvement list, but like nourishment you naturally seek. You've learned that self-care is not selfish indulgence but necessary maintenance, like keeping a car tuned up so it can provide reliable transportation. When you take good care of yourself, you show up better for everyone else in your life. When you neglect yourself, you eventually have nothing left to give. The work you do in the world, whatever its form, has become infused with the qualities you've cultivated in yourself: presence, authenticity, compassion, wisdom. Whether you're teaching children, building houses, managing teams, or creating art, you bring to it the fullness of who you are rather than just the skills you've learned. This integration of being and doing, of who you are and what you do, creates a quality of engagement that others notice and appreciate. People sense when someone is working from their authentic center rather than from obligation or ego, and they respond with trust, respect, and often their own authentic engagement. You've discovered that excellence in any field comes not just from technical competence, but from bringing your whole self to the task, from caring deeply about the quality of your contribution, from understanding how your work serves something larger than personal advancement. The competition that once felt threatening now feels irrelevant. When you're focused on being the best version of yourself rather than better than others, when you're offering your unique gifts rather than trying to copy someone else's success, the whole paradigm of scarcity and rivalry dissolves. There's room for everyone's authentic contribution. The world needs what you specifically have to offer, not some generic version of success, but your particular blend of talents, perspectives, and experiences expressed through your unique personality and values. This understanding has freed you to collaborate rather than compete, to celebrate others' successes rather than envy them, to seek mentorship rather than fear being surpassed, to offer guidance rather than hoard knowledge. The abundance mindset that flows from self-acceptance creates abundance in the external world as well. Your relationship with money has likely transformed along with everything else. Whether you have little or much, you relate to it differently now, as a tool rather than a measure of worth, as energy to be circulated rather than status to be hoarded, as a resource for creating the life you value rather than substitute for the love you seek. You understand now that financial security, while helpful, cannot provide the deep satisfaction that comes from living authentically. You've learned to distinguish between needs and wants, between enough and excess, between prosperity and greed. Money serves your values rather than the other way around. The political and social issues of your time engage you differently now as well. Rather than reacting from triggered emotions or inherited ideologies, you respond from your authentic values and genuine compassion. You seek understanding rather than being right, connection rather than conversion, healing rather than victory. You understand that lasting social change begins with individual transformation, that you cannot give to the world what you don't possess within yourself, that the healing you've done in your own life contributes to the healing of the collective. Your personal work is political work, your inner peace is social action. This doesn't mean you withdraw from engagement with injustice or suffering. Instead, you engage from a place of groundedness rather than reactivity, from love rather than hate, from hope rather than despair. You understand that sustainable activism requires inner resources that you can't pour from an empty cup. The wisdom traditions of the world make more sense to you now, not as abstract philosophies but as practical psychologies for living consciously. Whether it's the Buddhist understanding of suffering, the Christian emphasis on love, the indigenous connection to nature, or the mystic's direct experience of unity, you recognize the common threads that point toward wholeness. You don't need to choose one tradition over others or synthesize them into some new system. Instead, you take what serves your growth and leave what doesn't. Understanding that different teachings speak to different aspects of the human journey, different phases of development, different temperaments and cultural contexts, your own inner authority has become strong enough to discern what rings true for you without needing external validation of your choices. You can appreciate wisdom wherever you find it, while remaining anchored in your own direct experience of what works for your particular path. This spiritual maturity allows you to be genuinely curious about others' beliefs and practices without feeling threatened by them or compelled to convert them to your way of seeing. You understand that diversity in spiritual expression enriches the human family rather than threatening it. The great psychologist wrote extensively about the religious function of the psyche, the innate human need for meaning, connection to the sacred, and participation in something larger than the individual concerns. Your night journey through the forest of the soul awakened this function, connected you to your own sense of the sacred. Whether you practice formal religion or not, whether you use traditional language or not, you've touched something that feels eternal, universal, transcendent. This connection provides an anchor in times of uncertainty, a source of comfort in times of loss, a fountain of inspiration in times of creativity. The death that will eventually come to this physical body no longer holds the same terror it once might have. Not because you've become careless about life, but because you've learned to identify with something in yourself that feels larger than the body, older than your personal history, connected to something that transcends individual existence. This is not necessarily belief in personal immortality or specific religious doctrine, but rather a felt sense of participation in the ongoing creative process of the universe, an understanding that the energy and consciousness that express through you are part of something vast and continuing. This perspective transforms how you live each day. Knowing that this physical existence is temporary makes it more precious, not less. Understanding that your individual life is part of a larger pattern makes each choice more meaningful, not less significant. You find yourself naturally drawn to activities and relationships that honor the preciousness and brevity of human life, deep conversations rather than small talk, experiences that nourish the soul rather than just entertain the mind, relationships that call forth your best self rather than enable your worst. The meditation practices or contemplative traditions that support your spiritual life have likely evolved as well, becoming less about achieving particular states and more about returning to the simplicity of present moment awareness, the basic miracle of being conscious in a conscious universe. The service that flows from your integrated life takes whatever form feels most natural to your temperament and circumstances. You might find yourself drawn to direct service, teaching, healing, counseling, caring for those in need, or your service might be more indirect, creating beauty, maintaining traditions, supporting others' growth through your presence and example. What matters is not the form your service takes, but the spirit from which it flows. When your giving comes from fullness rather than emptiness, from joy rather than obligation, from love rather than guilt, it nourishes both giver and receiver. You discover the truth of what spiritual traditions have always taught, that giving and receiving are different aspects of the same flow. You understand now that you don't have to save the world or solve all its problems to make a meaningful contribution. Your part is to be fully yourself, to offer your unique gifts with an open heart, to love as deeply as you can, to create whatever beauty and healing you're called to create. This perspective relieves the burden of grandiosity that can paralyze those who care deeply about the world's suffering. You do your part without needing to do everyone's part. Contribute your verse to the great poem of existence without needing to write the whole thing. The ripple effects of your transformation continue to spread, in ways both visible and invisible. The peace you've made with yourself contributes to peace in your relationships, your family, your community. The healing you've done breaks generational patterns of unconsciousness, creating new possibilities for those who come after you. Children who grow up around transformed adults learn that it's possible to be fully human, to feel deeply, love openly, create freely, think independently. They develop what psychologists call secure attachment not just to people, but to life itself, to their own authentic nature, to the unfolding process of becoming. The modelling you provide for possibility, for living consciously, for choosing growth over stagnation, love over fear, truth over convenience spreads through your social networks in ways you might never fully know. People who witness authentic living are reminded of their own capacity for authenticity. Your very existence as someone who has done the inner work, who has learned to love themselves and others more fully, who has found ways to contribute meaningfully to the world while honouring their own nature, serves as proof that transformation is possible, that wholeness is achievable, that the journey is worth taking. In the quiet moments of your daily life, you sometimes still feel echoes of that night journey through the forest of your soul. The cottage where you met your integrated self remains accessible through contemplation. The garden where all aspects of your nature grow in harmony can be visited through meditation. The silver tree of wholeness stands always at the centre of your being. These are not just beautiful memories, but living realities, inner resources you can draw upon whenever you need to remember who you are beneath the surface turbulence of daily life. They remind you that you have already come home to yourself, that you already possess everything you need for a meaningful life. The transformation continues, will always continue, because consciousness itself is a creative process, not a fixed state. But now you participate in this process as a partner rather than a victim, as a conscious collaborator with the forces of growth and healing, rather than a passive recipient of whatever happens to you. As another day draws to its close and you prepare once again for sleep, you carry with you the deep knowing that you are exactly where you need to be in your journey of becoming. The path ahead remains largely unknown, full of mysteries yet to be revealed, challenges yet to be faced, joys yet to be experienced. But you walk this path now with different footsteps than when your journey began. You walk with the confidence of someone who has learned to trust themselves, with the groundedness of someone who has made peace with their humanity, with the openness of someone who has discovered that vulnerability is strength. The dreams that will visit you tonight may bring new invitations to growth, fresh insights into the mysteries of your being, creative inspirations for tomorrow's living. Or they may simply offer the deep rest that comes from a day lived authentically, from choices made in alignment with your values, from love given and received with an open heart. You understand now that every ending is also a beginning. Every completion contains the seeds of new creation. Every homecoming prepares you for the next stage of the journey. The night voyage through the forest of your soul was not a one-time event, but an initiation into a way of living that honours both the darkness and the light, the known and the unknown, the human and the divine aspects of your nature. The great explorer of the depths once wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Your meeting with your authentic self in that sacred forest space has created an ongoing reaction, a continuous transformation that will unfold for as long as consciousness flows through your being. You close your eyes now, not in escape from life, but in preparation for tomorrow's living, not in avoidance of your journey, but in trust of its unfolding, not in fear of dreams, but in anticipation of their wisdom. You rest in the knowing that you're held by something larger than your individual concerns, supported by the same force that moves the stars and seasons, connected to every other being who has ever loved deeply and lived truly. Sleep comes as a friend now, not as a respite from consciousness, but as a different form of it, a doorway into the deeper realms where healing happens, where creativity gestates, where the soul continues its eternal conversation with mystery. You surrender to this ancient rhythm of sleeping and waking, of day consciousness and night wisdom, of action and reflection. And in this surrender, you find the deepest truth of all, that you are exactly who you are meant to be, that your life has meaning beyond your understanding, that your very existence is a gift to the world, and that the love you have learned to give yourself is the beginning of all other love. The journey continues, will always continue, and you are ready for whatever comes next. In the darkness behind your eyelids, the forest path glimmers with eternal invitation. The cottage door remains always open, the garden blooms with infinite possibility, and the silver tree of your wholeness sings its quiet song of integration, calling you home to yourself again and again and again.